I found out my wedding was a hostage negotiation 4 hours before I put on the dress. My name's Naomi Reyes. I'm 29. I spend my weekdays telling other people's families how to talk to each other. I'm a licensed family therapist, if you can believe the irony. And that morning, standing in a borrowed lighthouse keeper's cottage, with the ocean going grey outside the window, I was staring at a bruise shaped exactly like my mother's hand. Not on my face, on my wrist, which meant, for 1 more hour, I still had a choice about who would see it. There's a phone in my bag with a voicemail I haven't played yet. There's a man downstairs who thinks he's marrying someone calm, and there's a word my family has used my entire life instead of the word sorry. You're going to hear that word in about 4 minutes, and once you do, you'll understand every single thing that happens after. Welcome to the channel. If stories about people finally saying the unsayable thing keep you company, stay a minute, this one earns it. Here's the smallest true thing first. My mother has never once apologized in my presence. Not for anything. What she says instead is composure is currency, a phrase she picked up from her own mother, who picked it up from hers, a family heirloom nobody would ever put on a shelf. Composure is currency meant, don't show what it costs you. Pay quietly. Keep the receipt to yourself. The night before my wedding, I told my mother, gently, the way you'd tell someone their tea was getting cold, that my Uncle Desmond wasn't on the seating chart she'd rearranged for the 11th time. She smiled. She refilled my water, and then, in the doorway of the cottage kitchen, out of sight of anyone, she grabbed my wrist to stop me from walking away mid-sentence. She didn't mean to leave a mark. That's what she'll say. What I know, professionally and personally, is that a grip like that isn't an accident of anger. It's a rehearsed pressure, applied exactly hard enough to make a point, and exactly soft enough to deny later. I've heard both halves of that sentence from clients my whole career. I had just never heard it about my own arm. I want you to sit with that image for 1 more second, because it's the whole story in miniature. My mother, mid-smile, holding my wrist like a librarian holding a book someone tried to check out without permission. To tell you why I didn't scream, why I went upstairs instead, and iced my own wrist in a hand towel, like it was somebody else's intake, I have to take you back 19 years, to a kitchen in Millbrook, New York, where I first heard the family word. I was 10. I'd cried at my grandmother's funeral loud enough that people turned around. On the drive home, my mother didn't yell. She reached over, without looking away from the road, and said one sentence that became the operating system of my whole childhood. We don't perform our feelings in front of people, Naomi. Composure is currency. I didn't understand it as a rule about violence yet. I understood it as a rule about noise. Keep your noise inside the house. Outside the house, we're fine. We are always, publicly, completely fine. Here's what nobody explains to a 10-year-old. Currency has to come from somewhere. Every ounce of composure my mother wore in public got withdrawn from somewhere private, and the person she withdrew it from was whoever was smallest in the room. Usually me. Sometimes my little brother, Theo, before he was old enough to get big enough that she stopped. By 13, I could read the difference between my mother's real laugh and her company laugh with my eyes closed, just from the exhale. I could tell you, from 2 rooms away, whether a slammed cabinet meant she'd stubbed a toe, or whether it meant somebody was about to get quietly, thoroughly corrected once the guests left. I got so good at predicting her that a career counselor later called it a gift for reading people. I didn't correct her. It felt easier to let a childhood survival skill get filed as a talent. There was exactly 1 adult who ever said the quiet part loudly in front of me, and my family spent 2 decades making sure I thought he was the problem. My Uncle Desmond, my mother's older brother, used to show up to holidays and ask questions nobody else would ask. Why does Naomi flinch when a chair scrapes? Why does Theo apologize before anyone's accused him of anything? My mother called him bitter. My grandmother called him dramatic. By the time I was in college, Desmond's just difficult was as accepted in my family as the shape of our noses. He stopped being invited to Thanksgiving the year I turned 16. I was told it was about money. I believed that for 13 years. 12 days before my wedding, Desmond texted me a single question with no context. Are you sure Elias is the one who's supposed to walk you down the aisle, or is he just the one your mother approved? I didn't answer. I filed it under Desmond being Desmond. I want you to remember I had that text sitting unanswered in my phone the entire week that follows, because it matters later. Hold on to that question, because the answer changes who gets to stand where at my wedding. I met my fiancé, Elias Marsh, at a hospital charity gala 3 years ago, arguing over the last item in a silent auction, a kayak neither of us needed. He's a structural engineer. He builds things designed to hold weight without anyone noticing the weight is being held, which, in hindsight, might be the most accurate metaphor for the man I was about to marry that I will ever find. He was steady, unbothered. He returned texts at the same hour every day, like a tide table. After a childhood spent forecasting weather, I mistook predictable for safe. Those aren't the same thing, and it took me until 3 weeks before my wedding to learn the difference the hard way. The small tells were there early, and I want to be honest that I saw them and translated them into something gentler than what they were. At a dinner with his firm's partners, I started telling a story about a difficult client, and he squeezed my knee under the table, not affectionately, correctively, and said, afterward, in the car, "Let's not make this our whole personality." He liked when I wore my hair down. He introduced me at his sister's engagement party, as in healthcare, never as a therapist, because, he said once, people get weird when you tell them you're analyzing them. I noticed. I filed it under things engineers say. I had spent so long grading my mother's moods that I'd forgotten how to grade anyone else's. My mother met Elias's parents exactly once before she'd redesigned my wedding from the inside out. She has a gift, I'll give her this, for making control look like generosity. She found us a discount venue through a woman from her book club. She simplified the menu to dishes she was famous for at church potlucks. She moved the ceremony start time twice because it suited the photographer she'd already hired without asking me. And when I sat down to write my own guest list, the first name on my card, above my college roommates, above my own supervisor, was Desmond Reyes. My mother crossed it out with one line of her pen, mid-conversation, without raising her voice. She said, "We are not relitigating that, sweetheart," in the exact tone people use to decline a second helping of dessert. I looked at Elias. I want that on the record because I was still gathering evidence about him too, whether I admitted that to myself or not. He shrugged, the kind of shrug people give in meetings when they've already decided not to spend political capital on your behalf, and said, "It's one name on a list, Nomi. Don't make the whole wedding about your family stuff. Your family stuff. Like it was a hobby. Like it wasn't the exact reason I knew how to sit so still in a room where someone I loved had just quietly taken something from me." I let the name stay crossed out. And driving home, I felt something I still haven't fully forgiven myself for. Relief. The old, shameful relief of watching a storm land on somebody else's roof for once. I didn't have words yet for what that relief actually cost me. I would get them in 11 days. If you've ever let something small slide because the alternative felt like starting a war you weren't ready to fight, tell me below. I read every one of these, and it matters to me that nobody watching feels like the only person who's ever done that math. And if you're new here, stay. This is the part where it stops being backstory and starts being a countdown. 9 days before the wedding, a woman came into the therapy practice I work at for an unrelated intake. Anxiety, she said, work stress, wearing a long-sleeve blouse in July. 20 minutes in, doing what I do for a living, I asked one open-ended question about home. She started crying before she finished her first sentence, and the whole rest of that session, all I could think, on a loop, was, "I know exactly how to help a stranger name this. Why can't I name it for myself?" That night I opened a document on my laptop I'd been avoiding for 8 months, ever since my own therapist first suggested it. I titled it plainly, in the flattest language I had, Incident Log, and I started writing dates. 6 days out, Desmond called instead of texting, and for the first time in 13 years, I picked up. He didn't ask about the venue or the dress. He asked one question, the same one from before, slower this time. "Naomi, do you actually know why I stopped coming to Thanksgiving?" I said what I'd always been told, that it was a fight about money after Grandma passed. He was quiet long enough that I heard traffic on his end of the line. Then he said, "I stopped coming because I called a hotline once, when you were 11, After I saw a mark on Theo's arm, your mother explained away twice in one sentence. Nothing came of it. Your mother made sure of that, and she made sure I paid for calling it in for the rest of my life instead. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub in that Lighthouse Cottage's bathroom, 3 days before I'd even get there, and felt the floor of my whole childhood quietly rearrange itself. Desmond hadn't been the family's problem. He'd been the family's whistleblower, and they'd spent 2 decades making sure I mistrusted the one relative who ever told the truth in front of me. The rehearsal dinner was, by every visible measure, beautiful. String lights, a toast from my mother that made 2 separate people cry, a story about raising a daughter with such composure. I sat there in my seat of honor thinking, you have no idea what you just called a virtue. Then, mid-dessert, a delivery arrived. White peonies, no note attached to anyone but me, and a card my mother reached for before I could read it once and set down without a word. I got to it 30 seconds later. It said, "For whenever you're ready to stop performing fine, D." My mother's hand found my elbow in the coat closet. 90 seconds after that, out of every camera's reach, her voice dropped to the register she reserves for corrections. How dare I let that man back into my life without asking her, did I know what he'd tried to do to this family once? Elias found us like that, his bride pressed into a coat closet by her own mother, and here is the test I didn't know I was running. He looked, for exactly 1 beat, like he might ask something real. Then he said, "Hey, let's keep tonight nice, big day tomorrow," and walked back toward the cake. I want you to notice that, not because it was cruel, because it was so smooth it almost worked on me too. That night, back at the cottage, my mother made chamomile tea nobody had asked for, sweet, which in our family has only ever meant one thing is about to turn, and started rearranging tomorrow. Day shift instead of my private practice hours once I was settled. My hair down, the way Elias liked it. The seating, one more time, for the photos. I said no, small word. First time I'd ever said it to her about something that mattered, and stayed standing afterward instead of softening it 30 seconds later. The kitchen went very quiet. A specific quiet I know the exact length of, the way sailors know a coastline by feel. She said, "After everything I have given you." And I said the sentence I'd been drafting in an incident log for 8 months, except out loud, in my own voice, for the first time. "You gave me a childhood where I learned to disappear so you could look composed, and I am done paying for that with silence." Her hand came around fast, the same grip, upgraded, around my wrist again, harder, twisting, the exact spot already tender from the night before. And what she said, once she let go and looked at what she'd done, wasn't an apology. It was, "This is what happens when you provoke people, Naomi." I didn't argue. I picked up my bag, drove myself back to a hotel 15 minutes away, and did, for my own body, everything I would do for a stranger at midnight in an ER waiting room. Ice, photographs, timestamps, a message to my own therapist asking her to put in writing, in her own words, what she already knew. She wrote back within the hour. 1 word, yes. I woke up 3 hours later with a strange, clean calm. The kind you get once every decision has already quietly been made without your permission, and all that's left is doing it. My hairstylist arrived at 8, looked at my wrist, and asked, gently, if I wanted long sleeves for photos. I said no. She didn't ask twice. My best friend Priya arrived at 8:30, did the 2-second scan people who love nurses and therapists learn to do without meaning to. Face, hands, posture, and asked exactly one question. What are we doing? Not what happened. What are we doing? I could have cried at the grammar of it. At 9:15, my mother swept into the getting ready suite in champagne silk, already halfway through greeting guests downstairs, and stopped mid-sentence when she saw my wrist in full daylight, uncovered, no sleeve. She didn't ask if it hurt. She said, "We can still do long sleeves for the ceremony photos." I said, "I already told the photographer not to." 3 knocks, Elias's voice through the door, bright, breaking tradition on purpose. 1 minute with my bride. I know, bad luck. My mother opened the door before I could answer, because some instinct in her had already triaged which ally she needed more in that moment than superstition. Elias came in glowing, saw my wrist, and I watched. This is the part I need you to really see. Half a second of real, human shock cross his face. Genuine. Correct. And then I watched it get smoothed, the exact way I'd watched him smooth difficult moments in boardrooms he described to me at dinner, proud of himself for staying calm under pressure. I said, "One question, Elias. That's all I need from you this morning." He looked at me. He looked at my mother, composed, chin up, champagne silk catching the light. He looked back at me, and I watched him choose. In real time, like watching a structural engineer pick the cheaper materials, the version of this morning that cost him the least. "Your mum's right," he said. "Sleeves for photos. We can talk about the rest after the honeymoon." Here's what happened inside me while he said that, because this is the only moment in this whole story that matters, and I want to be exact. Time didn't slow down. It clarified. On one side of the ledger, the venue, the ring, the calm, engineered life I'd built payments toward since I was 22, waiting downstairs for me in the shape of 110 folding chairs. On the other side, one sentence, said once, in front of every witness my mother had spent a year assembling for her own performance, and nothing guaranteed after it. I thought about the woman in my office in the long-sleeve blouse in July. I thought about Theo's arm at 11 years old. I thought about Desmond, parked outside a family he wasn't allowed into for 2 decades because he'd told the truth once. And I thought, composure is currency, and I have been paying it my entire life, and I am completely out of it. I picked up my phone, texted my officiant one line, "Delay 10 minutes, I'm coming down early," and walked out of that room in short sleeves. The quartet was mid-song when I came down the stairs. No veil, no procession. A bride in short sleeves with a bruise the exact shape of a hand, and the music didn't stop so much as fall apart, one instrument at a time, like nobody had rehearsed how to end it. I want to tell you the silence of 110 people turning to look at you felt like drowning. It didn't. It felt, for the first time in 29 years, like being fully visible and still standing. I walked to the front, not down the aisle I was meant to float down in 20 minutes, but straight up it, past the peonies from a florist I hadn't chosen, and I said the only sentence that mattered, and I kept it short, because truth doesn't need a bridesmaid. There isn't going to be a wedding today. Last night my mother did this. I raised my wrist so the light could do the honest work, and this morning, the man I was about to marry asked me to wear long sleeves so nobody would have to see it. I finally agree with him on something. Nobody should have to see it. That's exactly why I'm done hiding it. My mother rose near the front row, hand at her chest, reaching for the register that had worked on every room she'd ever stood in. I spoke before she could find it. "You taught me composure is currency. You were wrong. It's just debt with better posture." I turned to my uncle, standing at the very back near the doors, because of course he'd come, because of course he'd waited outside a wedding he wasn't invited to, in case today was finally the day. And I said, in front of everyone, "Desmond, will you walk me out?" He didn't hesitate. He met me halfway up the aisle, and we walked out together, the wrong direction, past 110 people who would talk about this Thanksgiving for the rest of their lives. Here's the short version of what happened after, because the truth doesn't need an epilogue longer than the confession. I filed for a protective order that Monday. My mother didn't contest it. Elias texted for 3 weeks and then stopped, which told me everything the smoothing over never had the courage to. Desmond and I have Sunday dinner now. Real ones. The kind where nobody scans anybody's face for weather before they speak. I still see clients in long sleeves in July. I ask my one open question, and some Fridays, I go home and add a line to my own incident log anyway, because healing, it turns out, isn't a single dramatic Saturday. It's just honest bookkeeping, one entry at a time, nothing hidden in the total. If somebody taught you that staying quiet was the same thing as keeping the peace, it wasn't. It was just debt, and you're allowed to stop paying it. Tell me below if you've ever had to name your own family's word for silence. I read every one, and if this found you at the right moment, subscribe. There's more where this came from.